So hello, and housekeeping note, I left swag back there, which the more you guys take, the less I have to carry back, which is awesome. But also I have nice little swag sample bags for questions. So ask me at any point, whatever you want, jump in. I'd love to hear about specific problems that you guys are having, and maybe we can all work them out. So I have this great sociolinguistic study that I just love. There's all of these different things you can do, like post-vocalic R deletion. If you're in Boston, you hear hawk the caw, or if you're in the South and you have a diphthong in a pin so that it becomes pin, or if you have, if you've seen on Twitter where because becomes the modifier of an adjective or noun directly as the full phrase, then you know that language changes greatly and often, and in really surprising and interesting ways. The sociolinguistics found that when they were looking at teenagers, the ones who did not want in this rural community to stay in the community, the ones that had the least amount of social capital in the area, the ones that wanted to go out to New York City or California, they were the ones that were most likely to pick up on these shifts. So they would actually show these linguistic markers of outside communities, whereas the ones who wanted to stay in the community would have the community markers at a much statistically significant higher rate. So we have to remember that language is this beautiful geometry of our connections and where we come from as well as where we want to go. Language and words are life actually happening. So words come up every day in our work. So when you're talking between the stakeholders and the clients and the users, the words that you use determine if people can understand you. Can people find you, or are you using too many jargon terms to be actually found in a search engine? Are you using the vocabulary of the people you want to find? Can people actually find what they're looking for once they come to your site? A great example I heard from Dan Klein once was that he was working with a retailer of some sort, and the marketing department insisted on using trousers. No one's looking for trousers, they're looking for pants. So when they went to go look in the menu, it didn't stand out to them as what they needed, so they didn't click it. And then what kind of a conversation are you actually having with new and potential clients, with your users? And finally, can people meet their goals efficiently, effectively, and with satisfaction? Are your words actually usable? This is not an elegant chart. So to talk about elegance, first we have to look at this example of just what are they thinking. So this was from a TED Talk from Eric Berlow, where he looked at the U.S. counterinsurgency strategy. Our government came up with this beautiful chart. Good job. But Eric Berlow ties it down to two very actionable sentences. We need to engage with ethnic rivalries and religious beliefs, and we need to have fair, transparent economic development from that. It's good to have all these connections, but it's even better to have this when you're in a meeting, when you're trying to make a point. So I first heard about plain language during the hot second that I was in law school, and I thought it was the greatest thing in the world. But then I came over into the web world, and I noticed that people, even though they had short attention spans and they had small screens, they were still using these cluttered, wordy phrases. So plain language comes into play to give you communication that your audience can understand. The thing about it is that it's only measured in terms of results. So something that's plain to one set of readers will not be plain to another. Warren Buffett wrote the introduction to the Security and Exchange Commission's Plain Language Handbook in 1998, and he has this great story about how he writes as if he's talking to his sister. It's not an original thing to do, but he says they're very intelligent people, but the thing is that they don't know the terms, they don't know the lingo, they don't know financial analysis, but they are smart people. So imagine if you had reversed your places and all of a sudden the sisters were the financially literate ones. How would he want to be talked to by them? The main points that we're going to go through today: speak to your audience, avoid jargon, give common words their common meanings, know which grammar rules matter and they don't all, and some of them are myths and lies, be precise, promote descriptions, don't hide verbs, be actionable, and use visual aids. So how do you speak to your audience? The first thing to do is understand that every audience is different, and even on the same project, you are going to have different target audiences. You want to know by their task, who is this conversation with, what is the context, what are your goals and theirs, and will everyone's goals be met by these words? We had my company had a healthcare client recently that they were supposed to serve the healthcare providers and the patients and people who were looking for jobs, basically, who were potential draws to the healthcare company in question. You have to let the recipient shape the dialogue. So we ended up with 3 separate sort of goals divided across this website, and each of the 3 had its own separate strategy. I think this is from Copy Hackers. I'm not certain on this. I'll add it to the references when I tweet my slides. But the parking lot test is this idea that you're not speaking to 100 people who maybe would buy the thing that you're trying to sell. You're speaking to 3 or 4 people who really would benefit from this. So imagine they're walking out to their car and they're juggling their laptop. It's been a long day at work and they have to hit the bank before they go home and they're kind of rushed. They don't want to talk to you. If you stopped them and said, "Hey, marketing jargon," do you think that they would want to stick around and listen to you? Or are you engaging them in some really new and interesting way that makes them want to stick around and engage in a conversation with you? Did you dilute your message to those 100 people, or did you win them over? So you want to know, who is this conversation with? What's the context? And the best way to know what you're doing is try to get out of the mindset of there being a correct English, because there's not. I dare you to put 2 English students or majors in a room and ask them if the AP style guide or if Chicago Manual of Style is correct, because they have conflicting rules. There would be probably a knife fight. It would be bad. So if you want to learn more, plainlanguage.gov is maintained by the federal government, and it has great information, albeit a terrible design. That's okay. They have great content, right? And look to the parking lot test when you're trying to decide if your words would actually reach your target audience. Are you using your words, what comes from your silo of experience, or are you using those of your audience? A lot of developers will use technical terms that they don't need to use. A lot of lawyers will use legalese. The marketing department is prone to fads. Try to be aware of where you're using terms that you are going to know and your audience is going to think of as just jargon. So the first step in testing your jargon is the MOM test, which comes from Steph Hay. So the first thing that you're going to do is figure out what your assumptions are about the user, what you think you know about their context. And then you're going to write your copy based on those assumptions. But then think of one person who sort of fits that target audience, who you're close with, who would call you on your shenanigans, someone like your mom, and see if she would ever say this. The next time you're ever tempted to use words like leverage or desire, run through this and it's probably not going to work. If your mother would use a word like leverage or harness, maybe pick someone else for your tests. Now, once you have the sincerity factor down, you might still be using the wrong vocabulary. So the closed deletion test is, like most of the tests that I'm going to show you, to be taken with a grain of salt and contrasted with other studies that you do. But first you're going to take a sample text, usually about 150 words. It stops being useful. And then you can start at the first word or somewhere in the first sentence and remove a word. And then every 5 words after that, you're going to remove that 5th word. And then you're going to hand it off to your users and say, how would you fill in the blank? And if you have them getting less than 60% in common with you, then you should be rethinking your text. If they're getting less than 40% correct, okay, so you're not unpredictable, but you should really, really seriously rewrite your stuff. So this is what it's going to look like. they're going to fill in and say, oh, that should be apps. Ding, 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 yay. So if you need to point to a glossary or a technical manual, then you're losing your users at that point. You're not making impact, you're not engaging anyone. Brian Gardner is basically my hero. He's amazing. If you only buy one book off of what you see in my book list, buy that one. Harvard Business Review puts out a lot of books on communication and management styles, and Brian Gardner has the best selection of writing. And then, of course, you can always look to the MOM test and close deletion test in your own work, pulling from your own experience and your own users. So, for the most part, you don't want to have to use a glossary or define your terms at any point. But if you must define your terms, then give them the common meanings. If you think it's really cute that you use a commonly known term and give it a different meaning, you're being a fool. Don't do that. If you want to know what kind of stuff to use and you're torn between words, then a great place to start is to check out your competition. See what they have on their website, see how they're describing their products and services. Follow the storytellers. For every project you do, you're going to have someone with a great story to tell. So look to your users, look to your target audience, and start with a story with general language. For the instance where I was working with a healthcare client, I don't have any experience with that. I have, quite frankly, a terrible biology background. No good. So start with the story and ask the user if this has happened to them and have them finish the story for you. That's the point where they're going to fill you in with the nouns and the verbs you should be using. They're going to give you what's important. Now, one thing is that this depends on active listening. So if you're talking more than them, then you're not going to get enough out of the conversation. If you're distracted or emotional, you're not going to understand them. You're going to be distanced from them. Once you have the nouns and the verbs collected from your storytellers, you can look to tools like Google Trends. And you can compare, well, they said these 3 nouns, and they all have roughly the same meaning. Let's see what people are searching for. Let's see what the related searches are. There's a nice geographical thing going on here. So you can see, oh, well, in the Midwest, people are more prone to use this term. So you can localize your content that way. So even if you're avoiding jargon, you can still be speaking a totally different language. Check out the competition in Google Trends and follow your storytellers. Not all grammar rules matter. In fact, many grammar rules are lies that your English teacher told you. I don't know why. They were mean. The purpose of grammar is clarity. The purpose of communication is actually engaging with and getting meaning across between multiple people. And the purpose of grammar is to have the clarity to make that happen. So your words should be naturally flowing. Brian Gardner actually is the one who came up with these 3 tips to get yourself into the idea of which grammar rules actually matter. So the first is read first-rate writing. I'm not saying don't read bad writing. It's fun to make fun of, but just be aware that 50 Shades of Grey is not great literature. Ask colleagues to proof your work, but also listen to what they're going to say to you. You have to be able to receive your feedback and actually change, grow from it. And finally, grammar and usage guides are great. I generally do lean on Chicago Manual of Style, but that's just because of my background. You can do anything, just as long as you have something to look for as this is what's normal for someone, this is what's worked for someone, and then build on that. Have your own house style guide. So the first myth is that you can't have a sentence start with and or but, and it's a simple one, but yes, you absolutely can, and there's cases when that will actually draw people's eyes to an area of content. If is conditional, whether is not conditional. So if someone says the meeting will start at 2 o'clock if the client responds by 1, then if the client doesn't respond by 1, the meeting doesn't happen at 2. Whether usually comes with or not, so the meeting will be at 2 o'clock whether or not the client calls by 1. So if you see a whether or an if, that changes the meaning. That is essential, which is non-essential. This one gets confusing because a lot of people think that a way to dress up that is by using which is very silly. But imagine if you have a chunk of a sentence that you could lift out and it wouldn't change the meaning at all, then it should be which, and it should be somehow cordoned off with a comma or with parentheses. An em dash works on either side, but something like the new project which Jane is going to lead kicks off tomorrow. So the which Jane is going to lead can be lifted out and it's still the project starts tomorrow. Dropping the Oxford comma can be disastrous. So I'm just going to leave this here for you. Top stories: world leaders at Mandela tribute, comma, Obama-Castro handshake and same-sex marriage date set. I doubt Obama and Castro are getting married, but they could. I don't know, but an Oxford comma would have solved that. Sometimes it doesn't matter. Sometimes it does. You can, in fact, end on a preposition. So when you say, "Where are you from?" that's perfectly fine. So the reason that people think that you can't end on a preposition is because in the 17th century, English grammarians, God bless them, they needed something to talk about, and so they said, well, in Latin, you can't end on a preposition, but we don't speak Latin. Unless you're speaking Latin, you can end on a preposition, which is great, because it leads to less awkward sentences in many cases. And then finally, you can get it right and still get it wrong. So the big one that I always point to is who versus whom. In pretty much any case where you can say whom, you can say who, and it works. It's grammatically valid, it's perfect. The thing is that if you say whom and you use it incorrectly, you sound very silly. If you use it correctly, then probably half of your audience is not going to be listening to the rest of your sentence. They're going to be sitting there thinking to themselves, what was the rule about that? Maybe they did that wrong. And so they're not actually listening to what you're saying. So even if you get it right, you can still get it wrong. There are a few tests out there to see how readable your content is. Common in the education field is this test. There's a couple variations. Wikipedia has some great discussion about how to run these tests. I'm not sure how clear this is, but it's the total words divided by the total sentences times 0.39 plus the total syllables divided by total words times 11.8 minus 15.53, or 59. So what it comes out to is if you got a 7.3, that would be equal to a 7th grade reading level, which is great, and it's pretty standardized across the U.S. It matches well to UK system of education too. The only thing is that this doesn't take into account the formatting of text. It doesn't take into account if your design is eye-catching enough, if your headers have enough of a color contrast to stand out. This is just for a block of text. So try and keep an eye out for some grammar rules that you know are myths, some matter. Just look at your sentences constantly. Be pruning for, does this make it more clear? I am a super big fan of Minion Fogarty. She has a great online presence, so you don't really have to buy her books. I didn't say that, but her books are great too. And then, of course, if you have perhaps a stakeholder that really wants numbers, this is the way to go. The grade level formulas are pretty great. But again, take it with a grain of salt. It doesn't take into account things like design. Contrast it with other data that you have coming in. Precision is so important, and all of these rules kind of tie into precision, but most important message should always go at the top. Sort of journalistic studies, if anyone's ever looked at those inverted triangles where like the meat goes at the top and then the least important stuff goes at the bottom. if you're trying to figure out what exactly you mean to say, what is the most important thing, try writing out maybe the 3 or 4 main points that you have as full sentences. That gives you a chance to flesh out your argument before you start pruning. But focus on short sentences and short paragraphs. The standard that we usually hear is 20 words per sentence, but I believe that was off of federal studies, which is a different context than most of us are going to be working with. So, grain of salt, but the guideline is around 20 words per sentence. Your readers are going to be experiencing your content usually as the written word, but if you can get some people to come in and read your stuff out loud, that's a great chance to see how precise your language actually is. So ask the users to copy out loud, or to say out loud the copy that you provide to them, and see where they stumble. That's a good chance to see, oh, I probably have some hidden verbs, or it's too wordy, or I'm using the wrong words, they're not familiar with these terms. And then the big one, ask them to summarize the copy. That's the chance that they have to say, oh, it was such a precise argument, here it is. If they can't give you a good summary of what they just read, then they didn't understand it, it wasn't precise enough. So maintain more direct content by cutting words as much as you can. Second most important book that I'm going to mention, there's, I don't know, maybe 30 edition. The 30th edition is out now, but you can find this one on Amazon. It's amazing. William Zinsser has a few things, but On Writing Well is his best book, I think. Whenever you're describing a noun with an adjective, try to put that adjective first, because if you don't, you end up having to add more words to move that descriptor to the end. Whenever you have an exception, or some sort of a conditional, that should go at the end, because if you don't, then people will stop reading at that beginning part, because they'll say, oh, maybe this, no, I don't think this applies to me, and they'll miss that first information. I'm not saying this from personal experience. I don't have fries in my car. So you could say the car that is silver, but that's more words, so silver car. Verb, adjective, noun, exception is a great structure. Not necessary, you can play around, but that is probably the clearest structure you can get. Something that marketing departments have been using since about the 1950s is called day after recall. Every couple years people decide whether or not it's a valid way to study, and then every other couple years they decide, oh no, never mind. So again, grain of salt, but show someone a passage of text and the day after see how much of the actual point of the copy they can remember. And it can be something very informal, like I sent an email to one of my coworkers who I know is in the target demographic and who's not on that project, and say, oh, hey, can you just look this over for me? I think I might be missing a comma or something. And then the next day stop by their desk and ask them, hey, do you remember that thing? Describe it back to me. It's kind of cheating. Users are better in the field, but be crisp and memorable. You can always restructure your sentences to be more memorable. Marsha Reefer Johnston, she's, I think, based out of Portland, but she has a book that just came out about a year ago, Word Up, that I think I recommend on multiple slides. It's really great. There's things that she says I don't entirely agree with, but she knows her stuff, and she has really in-depth examples of these things. Avoid hidden verbs. This really comes down to passive voice versus active voice, but people sometimes run screaming when they hear the word passive. It really comes down to turning verbs into nouns by their placement in the sentence. So this is actually most common among women over men, but everyone does it. So you would say I want, not I was wanting. All you're doing is hiding your intentions, hiding your meaning by just disguising that verb as a noun. I'm not entirely sure who to attribute this to. It's been floating around on Twitter, but if you take whatever your verb is in your sentence and add by zombies to the end of it, and it makes sense, then it's passive. So, she was caught by zombies. That's passive. They caught by zombies her. That's not passive. So, stop hiding your intended meaning. Again, word up, and then the passive zombie test. I really love that one. Every single screen that you have, whether it's a mobile app, a website, some sort of web app, it's going to have a primary call to action on every page. It'll probably have a secondary call to action, probably more after that. The primary call to action is usually going to be a button. The secondary could be a link or button. Everything after that is generally a link. That primary call to action you're going to want to have within 400 pixels of the top of the screen. In a mobile phone, because of the ergonomics of how you hold it, it's okay to have it at the bottom, but it should be on that initial screen without having to scroll down. But when deciding on the text for that actual primary call to action, you need to analyze what the user will get out of clicking through to the next screen. And from that, pick out your verbs, and from that, write your button text. You're going to want to lead with a familiar verb, and don't be generic, use a specific word. So just figure out what is the specific action the users are trying to get out of it, and then what is the benefit they'll get for taking the action. Pay attention to the verbs, especially in your primary call to action. Joanna Wiebe is one of the people behind Copy Hackers. They have a few ebooks online. They're more difficult to find because they aren't on Amazon, but they're great. They are absolutely great. Sometimes they seem to be leaning towards that clickbait kind of text, so super big grains of salt with this one, but she has some really great information. Even if we're just talking about copy, the way that you format your message changes how it's received. So show structures, help people compare options. There's a lot of things that you can do with the way that you format your copy to change the message. Left-aligned text is best if you're working in a language that is left to right. If you're not, I haven't seen the studies, but that would be interesting to learn. There are a lot of things like parentheses and end dashes that are generally considered an informal thing, but it's in web copy and in mobile copy actually a great way to get people's eyes drawn into that right spot. Again, it's considered more formal to write out your numbers, but having the numerals are really eye-catching. And generally for using numbers, it's going to be very important information, like it costs this much. But do avoid all caps and excessive exclamation points. That's fine for on Twitter and in your personal life, but maybe not at work. Headings are a way to categorize and section off different content areas so that as you're skimming, they can know where their eyes should stop. You want to stop the reader in their tracks when they find copy that's relevant to them. You do want to limit punctuation, but if it's a question, then a question mark, of course, is fine. One thing to keep in mind is with a question, you're not looking for an existential crisis. You're looking for an amen. You want people to agree with you by the time they finish reading the question. Subheadings should support the heading they're under, no conflicts, no new tangents. With bulleted lists, you want to shoot for 5 or fewer. 7 might be fine. It depends on the design. It depends on the spacing between the words, but you do want to limit it. The first is most important. Usually the last is not least important. The one before the last is least important, if you can help it, because that's the most likely to be overlooked. If you're using past tense or future tense, whatever you're doing, just have every item grammatically parallel. And then also, if it's chronological, then even if you don't do A, B, C, or 1, 2, 3, make sure that you keep it chronological within your items. So this is not great contrast, but this is a click test that, I don't know if there's anyone here who uses Chalkmark, but I'm kind of in love with it. This is one of our clients, and we wanted to see if they clicked here or if they clicked here. for if they wanted to find out about jury duty. And what we found is that most people went here, which we weren't entirely expecting. We knew one or the other was going to be more popular, but first click test is a great way to see, even if the content works, both sections, both headers and search boxes, the content worked, but which one actually drew people's eye. So you can get tools like Chalkmark, and what it's going to be is ask a question, like in this case, check if you have jury duty, where do you look? And they will click somewhere on the screen, wherever they would click first. And then we get results in the terms of heat maps that show this is where they clicked. So format shapes perceptions. So take that into account. Another copy hacker's book that I recommend, if you guys can get a hand on it. And then the first click test was really great. So going through all of these steps, give common words their common meaning will affect project management. You're going to be working with people in totally unfamiliar subject matter areas. If you're a vendor, you're going to be working with clients who you will never ever work in the medical field. But there you go, you have a client, now you have to go talk to them. Search engine optimization, you have to be using the same vocabulary, you have to be speaking in the same terms. You also want to do what I had mentioned earlier about the descriptions and demote exceptions. Google does generally give higher weight to things that are higher on the page. So if you have a page that has a lot of text and all of your keywords are focused towards the bottom, then it's not going to look as well on that page. Information architecture, be precise. Again, pants over trousers, but more importantly, be precise. You need your content strategy to be focused on being actionable and also on not hiding your verbs. Stay active if possible. And then finally, for usability, use visual aids and know which grammar rules matter for the sake of clarity. So let's go through a case study. This is entirely fictional. I do not support the fighting of babies in cages. So you want to enter a contract for a Cage Fighting Babies app. We will create web, Android, iPhone, and iPad application interfaces. How many interfaces do you think you're promising the client right now? That comma makes a difference. So right now, at the top you have web, Android, iPhone, and iPad. In the second one, iPhone and iPad are definitely two different interfaces. There's no question that you're going to deliver them for interfaces. So considering the size difference between an iPhone and an iPad, that matters in a contract. When you're collaborating with stakeholders, after reviewing the feedback, a meeting should be scheduled. Use pronouns and be precise. Precision is not just a matter of saying less things, it's the matter of saying the right things. When you're creating a design concept, you might be talking to the developers and they may say a CMS and they may say to interface with. Well, maybe you're talking with someone who knows a little bit about the web, not much, but you'll want to say content management system and then in parentheses say CMS in case they haven't seen it before. But really all you're saying here is we'll use web content tools to connect with the mobile application. So any of these sentences would work. Depending on who you're talking to, any of them could be the better choice. When you're writing button text, you could say click here to battle, but everyone here knows not to say click here, right? Okay. You can just say battle, because that's what they're going to do. When they hit the screen, they're going to battle. So now you have a rewards program. If you want extra strength in today's battles, the best way to do that is to check in today on Foursquare at your local Starbucks. That's a lot of words. Check in at Starbucks on Foursquare for extra strength in today's battles. You can, in this case, cut out a whole lot of words. As a general rule, whatever you have, you can probably cut it in half, and once you've got it there, you can probably cut it in half again. So just keep trying to cut. When you're creating error text, to enter a battle, you must complete the registration form. register is really what you want them to do. And when someone's dealing with an error text, all they want to do is figure out how to move forward, how to get back to where they can complete the task. Register, the verb, is what really matters here. When you want to survey the users on their experience, did you press the button that is red to battle before creating your profile? Red should go before button. Before you're creating your profile should really go at the beginning. When users are searching the App Store, you may find that the marketing department really likes the ideas of boxers, buckaroos, and Martians. But if someone wants a game with cowboys and aliens in it, they're not going to have found it. Whereas if when you're submitting the app to the App Store, you have in the description that it's about cowboys and aliens, then people searching for that will find it. So what it comes down to is really consistency. It's not about correctness, it's about in every instance where you're talking to the user for this experience, you are consistent in the terms you use and the experience you provide, and you need to keep testing. It's a constant thing. You're going to always be discovering new things, and there's lots of tests to be done. And just as a confidence boost, if you're capable of writing a sentence, you're capable of going back, doing it again, and doing it better this time. So I'm available on Twitter if you guys want to contact me with any questions. I love hearing from people, hearing new, interesting problems. Do you guys have any questions now? Yay!
I don't know if you're able to go back to slides to Starbucks example. Thanks. So I think the structure that you recommended was go here if you want this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Check in at Starbucks or extra strength. I was just wondering, you know, if you think of this as if you want to lead with the user's goal, with what they're most likely interested in. So for extra strength to make battles, that's probably what they're interested in. And then how they have to get that, that's probably the secondary aspect. So I was wondering how you feel about switching those two rounds. It's something that I personally struggle with.
Honestly, I do some A/B testing for that. It also might just come down to the stakeholders. If Starbucks gives you enough money, then maybe their name has to go first. But, yeah, that would be an interesting way to try it too, to focus on the user goals at the front of the sentence. What else are you guys thinking?
Sorry, Kimberly, would you mind running through the parking lot test again?
Yeah, so try and imagine that you have 3 people standing in a parking lot and they're on their way somewhere else. They don't really want to be talking to you. And you have some marketing like, this is what I'm trying to sell you. You give them your elevator spiel, and they're juggling laptop cases, and they don't really want to hear it. If they're so bored that they walk away versus if they stay with you to keep talking and finish out the conversation. Try and imagine those 3 people who have something else they could be doing.
Pondering. One thing that I've been struggling with is our audience is luckily very similar, but there's in-house people who are working for a company managing PPC campaigns.
Yeah.
There's agency people who have clients, and it's been difficult to, I mean, we basically are producing mostly the same content for both of them. They basically do the same jobs for different people. So talking about their customers, like, is finding the words to talk about who their customers would be, because for the company people, their customers are the people who are clicking on their ads, versus at an agency, their customers are the companies that they're contracting with. So it gets confusing finding the right words to talk to both of those people at the same time without making the other feel left out. So I didn't really have a question formulated yet, but that's kind of what's been running through my head.
It is possible to have multiple both multiple groups that you are focusing on, as well as multiple ways that the same group can be focused on your product.
I don't think I really deserve it. Thank you.
Everyone likes stickers. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just going to ask, that was a past question, so it wasn't a yes. When I asked you, are there any A/B testing sites that, I guess, not necessarily free, but just a quick and easy way you can run some, here's two different ways, how should I phrase it? It's crowdsourcing, or is there any A/B test sites that exist like that? Or?
Whenever I do it at my company, it's done internally. It's with our own tools. But I know Google was, they had something out a couple years back that I was looking at that was A/B testing for content. I don't know if it was something you had to pay for, but it may have.
Or even a subscription thing. I'm just
Yeah.
Things like usertesting.com, where you can basically assign, you offer to pay people to basically do a usability test, and you ask them to do a couple of different tasks and see if that works for you.
And are they is it pretty instantaneous, or is there a day or two lead time? How does it work?
I think it usually takes a couple hours for people to find your tasks and sign up to do it. We've used it in the past of our company and definitely gotten pretty good results. We needed 5 or 6 people to just quickly test something for us, and we had our results back in a day or two. So, yeah, and it comes with, they do it on video and everything.
And it depends on what kind of copy that you're testing too. If it's like a privacy policy that you want to see, you can't do it. But if it's just button text at the top, then something like that click test would work just fine.
Yeah, it's more kind of calls to action.
Yeah.
Some quick testing.
Yeah. You have questions?
Many. Our site, we've got a whole lot of profiles for lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
They do really well on Google. So someone searches for adoption lawyer or whatever, they'll go straight to the profile page. They don't know our brand. They're not going to go to our homepage first and then search for that lawyer. From the profile page, the lawyers pay for. How do we, lawyers tricks to increase stickiness, get across the point that people look for other lawyers, find a lawyer, without infringing upon this other paid space that typical tricks like other lawyers like this. They're like, I paid for that page, I don't know.
So the users actually coming to your website are not the ones paying you, are they?
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have two problems, right?
Yeah.
Our customers are the ones that pay us, but really we need their customers.
Yeah. That is very interesting. Huh. That almost seems like a design issue as much as a content issue that.
It's both.
Yeah. Well, because like Google Maps has if you have a business place page you can't get rid of, even if you throw money at Google, you can't take away that other businesses like that near here. But if you're trying to get more people to join, Google doesn't have as much of a problem getting people to join.
No, Google doesn't care about end users. But
Yeah.
lawyers tend to fight you.
Yeah, and they know how.
Do you have much success with the search box?
We don't have the search box on the profile pages. It's been thrown out and put that there. And that might be for in a passive kind of way.
If you had a search box that as they were typing it was the predictive population and it had their name, but it also had, you could tag this lawyer as similar to that lawyer, so that as you were typing one's name, another showed up beneath it, then you wouldn't have it on their page.
Yeah.
But they
so
wouldn't like the search box, though, would they?
80% of our traffic is from Google
Right,
the
to that.
Google profile page. You get, there's some traffic to the homepage, and they do the normal path,
Yeah.
search, results, filter, but that's not the deal.
What kind of success do the lawyers have? Like people coming through and then people actually.
Lawyers are really happy with their profile pages. We have the contact forms, they get their stuff, they get referrals, they're great. But our drop-off rate is like 80%.
Interesting.
Google profile line.
Yeah. I don't have an answer for you, but I do have swag.
But is the drop-off really a problem if the person, if the user is getting what they want and getting a profile of that lawyer they're interested in?
Yeah, again, it's the dual masters, right? So for the lawyers, no, it's great. For our management, why don't we more about it?
Speaking of lawyers, how do you, a lot of these rules seem to get broken in some ways by lawyers, like wanting copy in certain ways, product descriptions in certain ways, and things like that. And I've seen it where sometimes they want it vague, right? Versus like telling me, exactly, how much memory this hard drive has or whatever, like versus like you can just hold lots of music or something like that. So I'm wondering, whereas you see users who are like, tell me how much it can, like, that kind of thing. So I'm wondering how you end up balancing that out.
Balancing which part?
Yeah, balancing, like, sort of satisfying what the lawyer's needs versus what the user's needs are, which are often sort of in conflict with each other. I've seen too with like terms of service agreements and things like that, which are often very complex. They want it all there. People want sort of just, the clear, precise language, top line language. And lawyers, like, they don't want any ambiguity at all.
Do you have a lawyer that you work with regularly?
Typically, like, I'm a user researcher, so
Okay.
usually I'm hearing from users, and then I go to our client and say, hey, like, this is way too complex, and then they go, yeah, our lawyers make us have that. Like,
Yeah.
do you have any recommendations on how to fix that?
I would give the lawyer a copy of basically anything by Brian Gardner. He's also a lawyer, and he has another book, Plain Language for Lawyers, or maybe it's Plain English for Lawyers. It gets switched, the two terms. In most cases, the lawyer thinks that they have to say something to cover their behind, but they don't actually. So in that balance, the lawyer should lose, usually. The lawyer has more education and is more likely to perhaps go after you, but the lawyer should probably lose in that balance.
Do you feel sometimes, whether you're running it through the legal department or the QA department, that they find things to validate their existence? Right? Like, so it's like they feel like they have to find something to nitpick to edit, otherwise, what is the purpose of them having a job there? I don't know, me personally, feel like I've run across that a lot, right? Especially with the QA and these are all the lawyers. Like, if they don't find something, then might be right? And then it really
It's the lose the duck scenario. I don't remember what video game company it was, but there was a video game that they're like, wow, this is great, but we know that the stakeholders are going to want to change something, so they added a duck into it that followed around the main player, and so they take it to the stakeholders and they say, well, we love it, but lose the duck. And he had it already done up so that it didn't affect any of the rest of the gameplay. They could just pull it out, and the stakeholders felt like they'd done something. So if you wanted to, you could add a duck of your very own. Yeah.
We call it hiding the frog.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely ways around that to make everyone feel involved. But honestly, if they're at all involved in the project to where they could give feedback, then they probably have something legitimate to add. So we can make fun of them all we want, but there's probably something they could point out that would be helpful. Okay. More questions, guys. I think we have more time. Yes. Nothing? Okay. Well, I'm on Twitter, LaurenTGC, and there's more swag back there if you didn't want to ask a question, but also you want me to have to carry back less, which would be great. So thank you for coming.